Hey, what is going on, guys? Hope you're having a fantastic Sunday. Welcome to Sunday Night Live. Tonight, we're going to have a blast. We are talking about Dirac Live, as well as some really cool stuff that Storm Audio is bringing to the table in regards to processing as well as room correction. So tonight, we've got a special guest, Matt Trinklein from Storm Audio. Matt, what's up, buddy?
How's it going, Michael?
Doing fantastic, man. And as always, we got Ryan with the Send Audio AV. What's happening, fellas? We're going to have some fun tonight. We've got a lot to talk about. A lot of this is probably, I'll be honest with you, way beyond what I have experienced. And so I'm excited to kind of learn from you guys and to talk and dive deep into Dirac, talk about, some of the advancements that Dirac has had over the years, and maybe even answer some of your questions. So if you have questions, be sure to drop those in the chat. We'll do our best to kind of flag those and answer those, possibly even throughout the night. So if it's definitely in regard, tonight will be a little bit different format than what we usually do. I think it'll be kind of more focused on, the topic at hand versus a long period of time at the end of answering questions. But if you've got questions regarding Storm, regarding anything that we're talking about, definitely drop those in the chat. And like I said, we'll try to address those either as we're going or even tag those, and we'll address those as best we can at the end. So very cool, man. We've got a lot to talk about. So Ryan, you kind of put together kind of a little agenda, which is pretty cool. I love having organization and structure. So that's always a good thing. So I'm going to pull this up as well.
You're the organized one of this party. I'm fly by the seat of my pants a lot of times.
No, man. No, you just give it to me the last second. That's it. You're organized. You just
hey,
it gets there.
As the saying goes, without a plan, we have nothing to deviate from.
That is for sure. That is for sure. So we'll go ahead and jump on into it, man. So welcome you guys. Actually, before we do that, let me just say hi to some folks in the chat. K-Man, good to see you. Dan, John, Geotech, Chris, good to see you, buddy. Who else we got? Jed, Little Wiki, Rolex, Don from Florida. What's going on, buddy? Michael Grayson. Who else we got in the house? Michael, Derek, or David, I'm sorry about that. And Oprah Winfrey's in the house, man. Whoop, whoop. What's happening?
She's going to make it rain, Mark. MK3s.
Right, cool, man. We're going to have some fun tonight. So, Ryan, I'm going to let you kind of start us off, kind of introduce Matt and let him just share a little bit, and then we'll dive right into it.
Yeah, so Matt Trinklein from Storm he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Dirac and really all things audio. So, Matt, I'm just going to let you kind of talk a little bit about yourself, what your background is, let the people know who you are, what your past and history is, and then we can jump right into this. But I'll turn this over to you.
All right, pleasure. Thank you very much, Ryan. Myself, I'm one of those guys, just like a lot of us. I got the audio bug early on when I was in high school, and it was, car audio primarily that dragged me into these things, and bass, actually. I grew up in Alaska in a small town north of Anchorage. And I was the guy in high school you came to see if you wanted something put in your car, whether it was a subsystem, your dad needed a new radio because the clock on the factory one broke, whatever have you. I had a girlfriend at the time whose dad was an electrician, and he had a subwoofer in his car, and kind of got me interested and got all into it. And we were supposed to kind of do one together, and it never happened. And finally I just said, you know what, I can figure this out myself, and threw it all in. I actually had a sound system in my car before I had my driver's license and was able to drive said car. So, got pretty intimate with it before that. That was cool. And that, kind of changed the direction of my life to a large stance. I always, was good with my hands and thought I wanted to, do something with engineering, maybe mechanical. And I went through that and said, hey, electricity is really cool, and there's a lot of cool things that you can do with it. And kind of got the bug then. Would say in high school I probably did somewhere on the scale of 30 to 40 things and our projects here and there. And that's how I found Jail Audio, who I was like, this is at the time, back then, some of the stuff they were doing for car audio was a step above the rest, especially, for what we had access to in Alaska. And, I actually had a really cool moment last year. I got to go up and say hello and introduce myself to some of the folks over there and say, hey, I just want to say thank you, because you guys are the reason why I do what I do today. And I absolutely love it and couldn't imagine spending my life anywhere else. So I went to school for electrical engineering. And, funny as it is, kind of got lost along the way a little bit. I actually built a sound system for my car at the time in my dorm room freshman year. My roommate hated me. He came home one day and I had like a quick saw out going through plexiglass because I was building a bandpass box and all kinds of crazy stuff. And he was like, I'm not going to sleep here tonight. Fair. I was that guy. But yeah, so I've been building subwoofers since I was 14. Yeah. And playing around with all of that stuff. And that's kind of what got me into this more so. And then, like I said, I got lost a little bit along the way. Actually, when I graduated school, I wasn't even looking for anything in the music industry, or not music, but electronics and audio stuff. And I had worked at the time when I was in school at a company that did circuit boards here locally where I live in Reno, Nevada. And they had done some work for a company called Wisdom Audio. They do the microcontroller boards for them, for their amplifiers. And I knew the product very well because I wrote, the actual assembly line code for the surface mount technology, pick and place machines to build the boards, and would do all, the debugging and stuff like that. And, ended up getting back on that track, and it was just, everything was meant to be. I remember going in for first interviews and just falling in love. They took me into the theater and showed me the LS3, which is one of their flagship magnetic drivers. This is at Wisdom. Yeah. Yep. And it was magical. So what I call the magic arm hairs of approval, I've only had 9 times in my life, and that was number 1. And it was, I remember, there was a gentleman by the name of George Short, who is an absolute, just innovation genius in planar magnetic speaker design. He's probably one of the world's best minds in electrophysics, in my opinion. And he gave me the demo at the time, and was a fantastic individual. And, I didn't, at the time, didn't really know that he would end up becoming my mentor for the next 4 years. But it was fantastic. So every day. So that's what I did. My background, at a school, after I bounced around from a couple engineering jobs, I became the product development manager for Wisdom Audio. I spent 4 years there, working very closely with some very brilliant people. David Mickno, who was one of their mechanical industrial engineers that we would hire third party a lot of the time. George Short, as I mentioned, Ed Yeager, a lot of the team at Wisdom that's still there, Luke Yom, Ron Rouse, some great talent over there. And it was a blessing. So subwoofer designer since I was in my teens, speaker designer, and a lot of that being primarily planar magnetics since I was 23. Coming up on 30 actually next week. So
dude, you're getting
that's
old,
a little bit of my background. And now I work for Storm Audio.
Super cool. So what do you do at Storm Audio? Like, kind of like what, give us just a short snippet of like, what does your day in the life of Matt look like?
So the day in the life of Matt can be crazy because I have a variety of roles that we participate, as all of us at Storm Audio do. We're a very small company based out of France. If you aren't familiar with us, we're based out of Nantes, which is an hour outside of Paris. We do immersive surround sound processors and amplifiers. I've been there since September of 2020. It's a fantastic company. My role here is in the United States division. I'm our regional sales and engineering support manager. What that means is I put on the sales hat and do sales part of the time. I do all of our dealer interfacing. I talk with, our dealers and do training, remote sessions, how we, apply our processors in the different way our architecture and our system works, and the different kinds of applications that you can fit with that. As well as our calibration service, because we do offer a pro remote assisted calibration service to kind of take the burden off of dealers in that instance. Gotcha. It's not meant, to be to $4,000 to $5,000 professional on-site calibration.
Sure.
Because it's just not, and we're not there in person to do any
Sure.
kind of validation, and rely on you guys for that. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what I do in a nutshell at Storm, as well as managing all the fires. Just
There
kidding.
you go,
It's,
man.
it's easy. We don't have that many.
Super cool, man. Well, Storm Audio, like I said, it's kind of a new thing. I think I was pretty much introduced when I met with Ryan, and because I'm kind of more on the lower end kind of consumer, your Denon, your
You are
Marantz.
not.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm Odyssey dude. So I haven't gotten to like Trina. I've had some experience with it, but never calibrated one, never set one up. Storm, to me, that's like next level, man. So I think it's really cool to, whether or not you guys are at that level in your home theater, I think it's still really cool to kind of understand, what is behind that, what makes, a product like Dirac Live different than something like Odyssey, and what can Storm bring to the table. So like I said, man, I'm excited. I may have some questions of my own I'll be throwing in the chat, and we'll be talking about that. So super cool, man.
Yeah, by all means. So where do you guys want to get started?
I think a good place to start is there's a lot of Dirac is kind of this void for people in what it is. People interact with it on a routine basis as far as it's room correction, but that's as far as a lot of people's knowledge base goes. So let's talk about, I think, first of what is Dirac, what it does, and then we can branch into how best practices for implementation, so on and so forth. But I think it's really important to set a precedent, and let's start with what Dirac is.
Okay.
There.
So Dirac is a fantastic piece of software as far as technical advancements and room correction without having crazy requirements as what you have to have on your end, right? Dirac can be run as very simply as having a calibrated USB microphone,
right,
and a computer and a proper mic stand. That's it. It doesn't require you to have all of the fancy, different microphones with multi-capsules or, studio reference $1,000 microphones. Now you can use those and they make the experience that much better, but you don't have to have it. But what Dirac is Dirac is a piece of automated calibration software that attempts to impersonate how the human ear hears and perceives sound. And the job that it's doing with that is to correct what your room has done to the sound in your system and your speakers and tailor it for what you want. So, in a nutshell, the whole reason Dirac and other softwares like it came about is because back 20, 30 years ago, they recognized that, hey, every piece of equipment that we put in line from our source is technically degrading the audio from its original recording to what we're hearing. And so they said, as, digital signal processing and equalizers and all these things become more commonplace and available, how do we use that to actually kind of restore the sound quality and sonic signature of this room and get it back to the ability of being able to hear it in what was closer to what was actually live recorded. That's the bottom line of where these things came from, why they came to be about, and what kind of makes Dirac special and sets it apart is that they were the first people to take it to the degree and length that they did in Dirac version 1. So I remember the old Odyssey multi-cue stuff where you actually had a, calibrated microphone, you had a preamp that you plugged in. It was a delicate system. It worked well. It allowed you to take measurements of the room. However, when you went to do the room correction, essentially what you could do is pick between, a set number of default options for what you wanted your room curve to be or your house curve.
right.
And at that point in time, that was really cool. That was nice. There was no kind of big automated thing that was doing it like that. But when Dirac Live version 1 came along, which was deployed, on a lot of old like data set equipment, and some other people, it was different in the sense that it actually allowed you to individually tailor your curves and have, control points. And, basically it was a lot more finite level of control.
Mhm.
And on top of that, it was actually a little bit more advanced. It was looking to do two things. It was looking to take your frequency response and tailor it to how you want, as well as doing an impulse response correction. But there's one other thing that was kind of key to Dirac, the very first, and this was built into version 1, was it was trying to look at, one of the biggest things that you have in your room that can be degrading for sound quality is your first reflection points.
Mhm.
So that was one of the big things that it was trying to look at and also cancel out, way back when. And this is, I forget when they launched the actual V1, but this was back, way in the 2010 to 2020 decade on the earlier side, at least.
Gotcha.
Because that's when I started becoming, experienced and familiar with all of this. Dirac Live version 1 was fantastic, but it was also very difficult. And it was difficult to the point where people who were looking at it for the first time and weren't familiar with it had the ability to get very frustrated with it. And, that would kind of lead to people not using it.
Right.
And,
or maybe using it improperly and measuring incorrectly.
Yeah. Or using it in a, simplified version because they didn't know exactly what Dirac was looking for.
Gotcha.
Right. So, on that note, shout out to Dirac because they've done a fantastic job at kind of streamlining the way that their user interface works and making it simple for everyone to understand, which, promotes a lot more people calibrating. And, bottom of the line is every system, every room, whether it's a house, a car, live event, it needs a calibration. It really does. That's the, the dignity, the, last bit, as they say, the last 10% of a project can be the 90% of it. And this is where it really comes into effect and into play.
So where did Dirac go after version 1? Because their interface continues to mature and change. And as they continually learn and fix things, where has it gone since the implementation? Take us through what you've noticed as far as what Dirac has changed and implemented to get us to where we are now.
Well, so Dirac Live 1, when they went to Dirac Live 2, the biggest thing that they did, other than, user interface and simplicity stuff, was they actually changed the entire communication protocol. It used to rely solely on an MDNS protocol. And so you could actually have issues with your internet connectivity and it not finding the unit or dropping it. And, it was great, but there was a lot of, one small error could lead to something being corrupted and then you'd have to restart. So when they went to version 2, they actually changed the entire communication protocol that they use for their software with the devices that Dirac Live's put on. And that was the first thing that was fantastic. Makes it really, really easy to, communicate, not have any issues. Moving from multiple different types of units using Dirac 1 to Dirac Live 2 was a huge relief.
Right.
On top of that, Dirac Live 2 laid the foundation for some of the cooler things that they had coming later on, which leads into Dirac Live 3. So Dirac Live 2, started to show off this new user interface. It started to show off a finer resolution and actually how you could look at things and tailor things with the controls inside.
And when you say resolution, you mean like how zoom?
Like actually when you're in the filter design and going in and looking at things and, how much certain, changes, for example, and Dirac Live. So, and this is what I like to tell people a lot when we're doing Dirac, when you're down in the subwoofer range, when you're at, 40 to 60 Hertz, 0.2 dB adjustment on your target curve points can be night and day in actually what you're experiencing in your room. That wasn't as much the case with Dirac Live 1 in my experience. It didn't have as much control over the low end of your subwoofers as Dirac Live 2 and now 3 has. It's really come a long way with, how much they can bring that together. I noticed Geotech here threw a comment and say that it was able to wrangle his 6 subwoofers into compliance.
Yeah.
That's something that I see, time and time again. It's a fantastic thing, and that's really what was starting to be the biggest game changer when they went to Dirac Live 3. And Dirac Live 3 introduces the ability for Dirac Live Space Control Module, and it's a really, really cool way that they go about it. A lot of it is, of course, black box, because that's what they do and how they make money. But what they're trying to do, for people that don't know, for Dirac Live with the full base optimization, what that base control module is doing is it's actually using the crossover filters in a smarter way, with a little bit of their AI and their software, to try and actually linearly align the phase between each group of speakers and your subwoofers. And what they say is they're trying to harmonize them, but that's really what they're trying to do scientifically behind it, and that's why it works so well.
Gotcha.
And it does work fantastic. Now, not to say that you can't have a perfectly designed room that has 4+ subwoofers in it, and you could not use their base module and get some more advanced results.
Right.
That's not to say that at all, but for small, difficult, complex rooms, when you don't have lots of subs,
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic. I remember, and I personally have a very, very less than ideal subwoofer situation in my home theater, and my room is less than ideal. It's not sealed. It opens up from behind, kind of into my kitchen and dining room space. And using Dirac Live Base Management, I had better bass response in that room than I've had in some $1 million+ theaters that I've been in before that technology existed.
I think the reality is most of us don't have ideal rooms. I mean, we've got challenges, and I think that's where, really not complex, but really capable room correction software can really help out, especially in those areas that are challenging.
So the next thing that I think a lot of people have questions on before we dive into best practices and things to do is, what's the difference between Dirac? Like, you've got all of these different versions of Dirac on all of these different products that are coming out. And I've mentioned this before on stream, is that Dirac really doesn't do these implementations for you. It's very much here's the tools, you guys can go and make the implementation yourself. How does that impact what Dirac is doing? And can that impact the ability of whatever the hardware is at the end is able to accomplish?
Absolutely. 100%. Especially because I've seen this on the implementation side from multiple companies and multiple generations of Dirac Live software. And you really hit it right on the head there, Ryan, which is, it's not, Dirac is not something, it's not a card that, they give you that gets installed into your processor or your AVR and then it runs Dirac. That's it. No, they basically give you the software package and they say, here is our end of it. And you're responsible for implementing it, in your system, how you see it fit working best with your system.
Interesting.
And every manufacturer that deploys Dirac has had to go through that.
Gotcha.
And, you can get assistance from Dirac and, have them, give you some guidance on it, but it's really the manufacturer that's doing it, not Dirac. So there's different levels of Dirac, different levels of Dirac licenses. There's your Dirac basic level that only goes up to, I believe, 500 hertz, that they call Dirac Live Lite. Then, there's your full-on version of Dirac that has the ability to do, all of your, full frequency range from 20, we'll say, to 20 kilohertz. And then there's the full version of Dirac, which includes the base control module, which is what their base management system.
Gotcha.
And actually, when you're in the software, they call it full base optimization.
But even within those different levels of software and Dirac implementations, there's also different levels of hardware backend that is going to affect what
Correct.
Dirac is able to do as well. So it's not just the implementation, it's what resources you're giving that Dirac has available.
Right. And, I can't speak to what everybody else who's done that's deployed it is. I can pretty confidently say, as far as the Storm side, and what I've seen with it, it's one of the more advanced implementations of Dirac and the things that we can do with it. And the different, manipulations that you can have going back and forth in different versions of different things. For example, we made the comment that not a lot of us have ideal rooms, right?
Mhm.
So let's say, for example, you're that guy who has the motorized drop-down screen, right? Well, do you ever put that screen up? I'm willing to bet that you do. And I'm willing to bet that sometimes you listen to music and
Mhm.
that screen doesn't come down.
Right.
Now, let's go out on a limb here and say that when you did your calibration, you were probably thinking about movies and you had the
Sure.
screen down.
Right.
Well, what that means is when you're listening to music in the daytime while you're, cooking dinner, lunch,
Mhm.
whatever have you, and the screen's up, you're not listening to that in the proper state because you've removed that variable that was in the calibration from how you're listening to it now. So theoretically, for something, an instance like that, you would actually want to have two different calibration presets
Profiles.
and be able to switch between them, and maybe, you've got a system where you can do some conditional programming and have that built in and say, hey, when my screen's down, switch to, this calibration. When my screen's up, switch to this calibration.
Mhm.
That's a very realistic thing that should be deployed. And this is the great thing and why I love audio files and audio engineering so much, right? Is because there's never okay, we're done.
Mhm.
It's now we've gotten
My
to
wife would like that.
all of our wives would like that. But it's now we've gotten to this point, and say maybe now we're at 85% and it's taken us the last 3 years to get to 85%.
Mhm.
How
Sure.
long is it going to take us to 90%?
Right.
That might be another year and a half, 2 years. It totally depends. And I love making, metaphor relations about that from, speaker design. And, some of my past history, because it's like, theoretically, you could just never release something and continue to work on it until it got better, but you'd
Mhm.
never get anywhere doing that. So, the sky's the limit, and you have to decide, what's appropriate for you and what's
Mhm.
appropriate for your room and your theater. And that's, it's a very real thing. I mean, I tell people all the time, because as I mentioned, we have our own, remote assisted calibration service. And I, very strongly invite the integrator or whoever we're doing this with to bring the end customer into the room and the project and into the conversation and say, hey, we have target curves that we've dictated. That's our starting point.
Mhm.
Now, they're not as subtle as they could be. They're pretty dynamic, but they're not over the top on the high end, the low end, the mid range. It's kind of a neutral point, right? And this is the verbatim what I say every time is I could set up your room for what would be, theoretically correct as a reference, but if that's not what your listening taste and your listening preferences
Right.
are, then I'm doing you a disservice and we're leaving value and money on the table. If you're a bass head and you want a 15 dB curve on the low end, you need to
Right.
let us know. Now, am I going to go in and increase your levels 15 dB on your subwoofers? Absolutely not. But we're going to tailor it in a more advanced way
Mhm.
before, until we get to the point where you're happy with it.
Gotcha. It sounds like there's just a ton of flexibility.
Yeah.
And so for the guy that really wants to dive deep and
Mhm.
understand what's going on in the room and really tweak it, like you said, be able to create different profiles for different scenarios, Dirac will definitely give you that option there.
Now, in
Yes.
diving deep like that, what are some best practices when you're going through the implementation? Because you've done this a few times with me, and when I was first getting into this and you did it, it became very apparent to me that you actually want to do manual calibration before, to an extent, before you even run Dirac, right? So there's things that you want to do, and you don't want to leave everything up to Dirac because it's not a end all be all solution to fix everything, right? You're going to have to try and make or minimize issues before you let Dirac try and take a stab at getting its hand around something and making a correction. So what are
Right.
some of the do's
So,
and don'ts as far as a Dirac implementation in your mind?
okay. So let's start off on the don'ts, I guess, because that's way, way easier. Technology is great. What I like to remind people constantly is that technology has not gotten to the point yet, or nor do we know if it ever will, where we can beat physics. So if you're in a absolutely horrible environment, Dirac by itself is not going to make all of that go away.
Sure.
One of the stories that I like to tell about advanced and manual calibration and their use cases and, synergies and how they kind of align and play together is a room that we did that had a brand new screen. It was an AT screen, in-wall speakers, and it was the first one that had come off the line from the mill, and there was a problem with the die. We found out during the first measurements that we did, because when we first turned it on and played something, so this is the first thing too. First, don't just go into your system and immediately run Dirac. When you have your system set up, you want to listen to it. You want to establish a baseline, right? That way you know how these speakers sound in your room without anything else being done to them beforehand.
Gotcha.
So that's your first don't. Don't just, go in without having any understanding of how the room is now. Second is, going back to the story, what we found was the problem with the die. There was actually a roll-off starting at 1K. And by the time we were up to 4 kilohertz, we had 14 decibels of attenuation. And that continued all the way through the high frequency range. Pulled the screen down, confirmed that it was actually the screen that was doing this, had an event going on, wasn't going to be able to have a replacement screen come in time. So what we did was we layered a manual calibration on top of it. And we went in and we did corrections, because Dirac does not have the ability to boost 14 dB. Dirac actually has a bylaw written into it internally where it will not add more than 8 dB of gain to anything. Even if you have a 20 dB hole, Dirac's not going to fill it up. Sure. And what we found through hundreds and hundreds of tests, and this goes back to even Dirac Live 1, what we found was if you allowed for that bylaw to come into place, right? Say I have a 12 dB null, and I say, no, I want this to be at, -1, that's 11 dB of correction. If I leave that how it is, it, is going to come out fine. It's not going to give me any errors. Everything is going to look hunky-dory. And then when I go to listen to the system, you're going to say, it sounds okay. And then about 45 seconds in, you're just going to have this sensation that something is inherently wrong. And introduces what I call digital fatigue. And that's where you're putting too much DSP into a system at a certain point, and what it's doing with the phase relationship and everything else electrically is creating a problem. And very, very few people can actually identify that, but it becomes painful to listen to. And if you, just spend a bunch of money on a system and now it's painful to listen to, what good is that?
Well,
so you want to be careful with those things.
When you start doing room correction to that level, you may be adjusting for one seating position, but what happens when you get out of that seating position? Now the person may be having a 11 dB boost, and you're going to have this huge spike that wasn't present in the other one. So you have to be really careful when you do this kind of stuff, because
you do. Absolutely.
It depends on your seating. And I think this goes into very much of something you'll show people about the seating diagrams and stuff with Dirac measurements and where to take all of that. There's a lot of things to consider.
So on that note, let me finish do's and don'ts though. Best practices, right? It's not going to fix everything. So if you have things that you have a feeling that there might be something wrong in the room, do a manual measurement first and take a look. Because like we say, just with any other computer process, right, the less work you give it to do, a better job it does. That's, really the goal of doing a manual, pre-calibration beforehand. So, all of this stuff plays together really well. But there's a lot of fundamental things that are simple about how Dirac Live works. So, for example, your very first measurement point is what dictates your delay and level settings that Dirac is going to come up with. Everything else is going to be frequency response weighting. So, for example, we tell people, and this is part of our practice that we do here at Storm Audio, once we go in, we set everything up, we do the volume calibration, we go into Dirac, we take that first measurement. At that point, we're actually going to click the button to proceed to filter design, and Dirac's going to give you a little pop-up and say, hey, you only have one measurement. Are you sure you want to do this? And yeah, you should. You should go in and you want to look at that measurement that you've taken and look at the frequency response, results individually for each channel. Look at, the impulse response of your subwoofers and make sure that that measurement you have and you've taken looks valid, right? You don't have anything crazy going on.
When you say impulse, just to clarify for checks, I'm sure people have questions. What do you mean?
impulse is your timing. So impulse, there's two different tabs in Dirac Live. The main thing that you look at is your frequency response. The other thing that you look at is actually your impulse response. And that is the time, and this is, what Dirac has said, or what Dirac is sending and calculating on its own. But basically, from the time your computer tells the processor, AVR, whatever have you, to send this signal to when it starts to receive it on the microphone is your impulse time. And so it's going to measure all that. And that's actually how it allows you to say, I want everything to correlate here. Like, for example, in my room, I have two different settings. I have a time alignment for back on a couch when, everybody's relaxing, watching movies, music, whatever. Right. And then I have another time alignment setting for when I'm going to do like racing sim style stuff. And I want to be up there closer to my room because those two positions are, 7 feet apart from each other.
Sure.
So you want to actually, this is something that we do, is you want to go in and, when you first click on it, you'll see the actual measured and the corrected. You want to turn the corrected off because you're not doing anything with it yet. But you want to look and make sure that Dirac has actually captured a nice, immediate impulse, and that you don't have a bunch of transient stuff going on that's not giving you a clear time point.
Okay.
So,
that makes sense.
You want to go through and verify that your first measurement position is good, and come back into it. You want to measure and make sure that you're paying attention to the calibration, because things can happen. It's just one of those things, unfortunately, with, the computer software and everything that we're at. You can have weird things that go on, and you want to make sure that, for example, as you're running through your measurements, there's an on-screen graphic that happens. And I've seen it happen before where, all of a sudden we're on our fifth measurement, and now for some reason, the actual level that I'm seeing, the amplitude of what's coming in is much less. And maybe something weird happened and it reset its, microphone gain setting. These are all things that you have to pay attention to and watch during the calibration, just to make sure that nothing goes wrong.
Okay.
So, it's a hands-on thing. And then, of course, at the end of it all, do listening verification, use content that very well.
Sure.
Use content that is actual physical media, not something that, you're streaming from Apple TV.
Right.
And then the other side of this is, remember that it's a computer software that's trying to impersonate how the human ear hears and perceives sound. So if you get all the way done and, you listen to it and your ear tells you that there's something that's critically wrong, then, listen to your ear, go back in, make the changes until, you're happy with it and it sounds correct.
Okay. That'll make sense. Is there anything that Dirac that you should watch for Dirac to do when it maybe does something wrong?
Yeah, there's a lot of times it'll give you an error code and say, samples lost during recording. And that's kind of a cue, as it's not going to prevent you from doing anything. You'll have to retake that measurement, but it's a cue of, hey, something's going on here. Maybe I have a network jitter or something reset itself, and I want to take a look and verify real quick before it comes in. Most of the time, it's really good at telling you if there's a problem or an error, and it's really good at refusing a measurement. Say, for example, if you get into, a hotspot in your room, for example, and you just keep clipping and you go back and you adjust your volume calibration levels, which is something that you can do. Just so that you're aware, when we're talking about Dirac Live, one of its most important things is volume calibration stage at the beginning, and you want to do that from the main listening position. But all of that data is stored independently. So if you get to one spot and say my subwoofer is just too hot here and I can't do it, you can go into the volume calibration page and actually adjust the attenuation on that subwoofer to take that measurement, and that data will be stored for that specific measurement point, without ruining what you've done for the other ones.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, very advanced actually in that way. It's all stored independently per. So, it still does really well with all of that. and they've come a long way in making sure that that's stable, and it is, easy to do. The other thing that I tell people all the time is make sure you have an account, because if anything ever does go wrong, and Ryan, I know you've experienced this, if you're logged into your account, Dirac actually auto saves every step that you do to your hard drive.
Yeah.
So it's really nice if something crashes and goes wrong that you can reopen the software and hit resume previous session.
Yeah.
You don't have to go back and do everything over.
And I do want to clarify that Dirac's doing a lot. Like, there is a lot of stuff going on. So there are times where things are going to go a little bit awry, and things happen. So having save points and backups and that you can restore to saves a lot of headache and head desk moments. So it is. Matt brings up a very good point. If you're running Dirac, make sure you log in, because having those it's a lifesaver. So now that we've kind of gone through that, let's jump over. We've talked a lot about Dirac. Let's look at Dirac, if you don't mind, and how it pertains on Storm itself, and maybe look at some of the measurement points in the diagrams and stuff that you've got, and we can go through that. Am I okay to bring up your screen?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to make my screen bigger so I can see here.
All right, so what I'm showing here on my screen, this is actually the web user interface of a new Storm Audio MK3 Elite processor. It's our flagship processor. This is a 32 analog channel unit. What we've got here right now that I have set up is an 11.5.0.6 theater. So, a lot of people immediately, whenever I use notation like that, say, hey, what's going on here? Storm, the way that we do things is in layers. So your base layer, which is your very first number, is all of your main ear level surrounds. So LCRs, wides, I've got surround zeros, surround twos, and rear surrounds. That's my 11 channels. The 0.5 that comes after that is the subwoofers. And as you can see over here, I've got 5 of them, even though it's only showing one little sub. That's because I'm decoding one LFE channel. Then we actually break out the difference between, in our notation, between what's called a height channel and a top channel. So a top channel is what people traditionally call an Atmos channel. That's your in the ceiling, maybe 45 max angle in the front to 150 degree angle in the back. Those are your overheads. That's your top layer. Your height layer comes from those actual, as Ryan has a center front height position, and it's different. So a lot of times, when we're talking about this, we have to ask for clarification and say, hey, are you talking about top layer channels, and are you talking about height layer channels? Because those decode completely differently. Your height layer is the intermediary point between your base layer and your top layer. So in a fully maxed out decoding theater, if I have an object, an audio object that's going to come from in front of me and come up over behind, it's going to hit my left and right fronts. Then it's going to transition to my height channels, and then it's going to go to my left top fronts. So that you have psychoacoustically this entire cohesive object moving around you. So that's how we work. This is kind of just the base theater that I have set up to talk about this and kind of what makes things different, but just wanted to show this and give you all, a representation of where these points would be for what we're talking about. We'll quit this and come out. So what we're looking at here is our expert base management mode. So totally different than what it looks like if you use Dirac base management, because this will actually all be grayed out and this will say Dirac. But this is one of the things that we do when we're going to look at, for example, and do a little bit of manual calibration beforehand. One of the things that we do in kind of our methodology is we would come in and actually use an external signal generator, and we would run, our measurement system, whether it's RAW, smart birational acoustics, whatever have you, a third-party measurement system. And we're going to actually run it through each channel, and we're going to look at the LCR channels, do, fixes to them if we need to. And then we're going to look at the subwoofers independently and do, anything that we can do there. A lot of the time, if you take a measurement of the subwoofer, you're going to see very, very large peaks and dips. And those are modal things happening in your room, and you can't always correct for that. So it's a little bit of trial and error, because say, for example, I've got a, 10 dB hole that's, very narrow, right at 55 hertz, and I throw a little bit of DSP at that, I want to actually look at it and verify it afterwards and do another measurement. Because if it's not making an adjustment, then I don't want to put it into the room and have erroneous things going on, right? So the other thing, once you're all said and done with that, and this is where things start to get really important, and I know, Ryan, from your experience, you can attest to this. After you look at them all individually, you want to look at how they actually all blend together. Okay. Because your independent subwoofers might be, really nice, and then you play them all together, and now your result is, 50% of the performance that you had looking at them individually. And you're saying, hey, what the heck's going on?
Fighting each other at that point.
Exactly. So, you may want to add some delay to them. There's a lot of, school of thought about, for example, adding anywhere from 2 to 8 milliseconds of delay to your rear channels to get out of the position where they're fighting each other at your listening point. Gotcha. You can also go in and make, a toggle on the polarity stuff if you'd like to. So, you want to go in, you want to make sure that all of those subwoofers are integrating properly together. And then lastly, now that your subwoofers integrate properly together, you want to go in and make sure that your subwoofers integrate properly with your LCR channels. Because if, you set them all together, but now there's a null at where they cross over between your LCR channels, once again, you still implemented a problem into the system that might not have been there before.
Gotcha.
So, you really want to be careful in how you look at all those things. And then what I'm going to pull up here, actually, because I don't have the ability to show it on hand, is one of our Dirac videos, because I don't have this set up to log into Dirac. And we'll mute this real quick. But this is the other big thing. Once you get through Dirac and the volume calibration stage, you come here. To this page where you say select arrangement.
Well, before we go any further, Matt, I'd like to point out that what Matt was talking about previously in Storm, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a lot of stuff that you want to do before you even run Dirac.
Correct.
I mean, it's things that you want to try and figure out and see if you can fix room modes by maybe repositioning subs and moving things around. Then run room correction and allow Dirac to do its thing.
Because the less it has to do with DSP, you're going to get a better result anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So to come back to that, this is the big thing where I think a lot of people have confusion about how Dirac is working and in their setup. And it's in this select arrangement view and then the corresponding diagram that comes along with it. So, once you get into this stage of Dirac, you have these three options. You have tightly focused imaging, you have focused imaging, and you have wide imaging. And as you scroll between these things, Dirac is going to show you a slightly different graphic. It's going to show you this little singular chair here, and it's going to say 9 measurement positions. Then, wide imaging is 2 people on the couch and it says 17 measurement positions. And, this is where we already start to have a little bit of split in our understanding and what's cohesive, right? Because I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that this graphic, is not representative for 80% of the people who's watching this home theaters, right?
Interesting. So I would use that in my theater. I've got 6 theater seats thinking, okay, this is what I need to use.
Right. So here's the thing on this. The difference between all these things is not algorithm based. It's not practice based. It's not, Dirac weighting things differently to make things tighter or more focused in certain places. The difference between these 3 options is actually the number of measurement positions between 9, 13, and 17.
Sure.
And this is one of those things, where you could kind of, pick and choose what school of thought that you want to adhere to for this. One of the most recent studies that's come out by a scientist in Germany, I believe it is, on room acoustics and calibration, says that, as the larger that your room gets, you actually want to reduce the amount of microphone positions that you have. So if you're up to the point where you have a 30-seat theater or larger, you actually don't want more than 4 microphone positions.
Would you say
And
that
that's
that's
it.
because you have to deal with less reflection points? I mean, your room's overall bigger, right? There's some things in audio that you're more akin to running outside at that point, wouldn't you say? I mean, you're going to have reflection points, but you're not having to fight as much.
So when you're looking at room scaling, that's kind of a very common thought to have. But the bottom line is your first reflection points don't go away. They move to different points. They move to different points in the room. It actually has more to do with how the room is blending modally based on size. So, the real takeaway from that is the smaller and more complex your room is, the more of a variation you want to give to the system. So in our practice at Storm, I would say 70% of the calibrations we do, if not more, are only using 9 measurement positions.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to use 9 measurement positions. Dirac will actually let you go all the way through the process and do a calibration with 1 single measurement position. Sometimes that's the case. If we want, a starting point, I might actually do that sometimes in certain scenarios to actually listen to and validate our first measurement position and then go through and perform the rest of them and finish the calibration. But it really does work best when you give it at least 9. And I would say the rest of the time when we're in complex rooms that are a little bit larger, we'll use the 13 measurement positions. I'm almost never using 17.
So what about mic positions?
So, and that's the other thing that comes alongside this. And this is,
it shows you like this little box and where to position those, right?
Right. So, and this is, one of those things that's also different for every room.
Right.
So, if we look here at the 9 position graphic, this is what Dirac gives you.
Right.
Now, if I have a small theater, say, for example, my theater is 1 couch, even though I selected that I wanted to do 9 measurement positions. If I do this in my room, I'm here,
right
here. And, that might be okay. In my room downstairs, that I've tried it. It works okay. Once you get up into, especially more dedicated rooms and you have things that are built symmetrically and everything is done in a grid-like fashion, this becomes less impactful. And the reason why is because I'm giving Dirac the exact same bit of modal information twice. Okay. And so I'm not giving it a full picture of what's going on in the room. So to the left here, you can kind of see a version of what we do and why it's a little bit different. And funny enough,
so in your software, it'll show you different map, or is this something totally different?
Nope, this is something totally different. This is part of our PRAC service that we do.
Gotcha.
It doesn't look like this. These are the graphics that we produce.
Okay.
What it actually looks like is this.
Okay.
So this is what we do for, this service that we provide is we actually create a microphone survey for your room.
Okay.
And if you look at this, there's some things that stand out immediately.
Interesting.
My position 1 is kind of the only position that's directly in a head point, which to a degree makes sense, right? Because number 1, not every single person has the exact same body type. Not everybody sits in a couch seat the same. Some people have a natural, habit or tendency to lean to one side when they sit down in a seat, or to sit really far forwards or whatever have you. So what we do is actually try to move around the room and give as much of variation in this, range or window, as it were, to make things, for Dirac, give it the most, fully detailed view of what's going on within the listening area.
Gotcha.
So we have a couple, very basic rules that we follow when we're looking at this, which is we try to not put any microphone positions on the same X, Y, or Z axis positions within the room, within your listening area. You want all of your positions to be relatable, right? Like if this was my couch scenario, I wouldn't have a microphone position, 4 feet out in front of the couch.
Right.
Now, if this was, a media room and I have a bar behind the couch and I know that half the time people are going to be standing there behind the bar, I might, put a position that's 62 inches up and scaled backwards towards there because I want to pick up, what is going on in that position. And once you go into Dirac, it's kind of an interesting thing if you've never done it before. Dirac by default is going to show you your average spectrum, but you can actually go down. There's a button called spread that you can click on and it'll show you everything. And, from what the average it gives you, you might have, 10 dB highs and nulls from that average as you go across the frequency response graph. So this is kind of why, we do what we do. Funny enough, this is very similar to, especially if you look at it from this overhead view here, it's very similar to the graphic that Dirac gave in Dirac Live 1. Gotcha. And as somebody who learned Dirac Live 1, learning Dirac, it was one of the more complicated things to learn was, where do you want me to actually put this microphone?
Sure.
So that's part of why we do what we do. And why we use this methodology. In our experience and results, it leads to a much better result.
Very cool. So you actually have some different suggestions and recommendations that Dirac itself is dictating.
Well, and there's a reason why. So, if we go back to the beginning when I said that Dirac 1 was very complicated and overwhelming,
right.
A lot of changes that they've made in the user interface are to make it more simple and easy to understand. And that's fantastic. Love that because it leads to more people doing calibrations, more rooms getting calibrations, and,
sure.
Better end results for everyone. And, at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do. However, as anybody who has spent some time with audio engineering knows, once you sacrifice complexity for simplicity, what you're giving up on the other side of that equation is acoustical performance.
Gotcha.
Anything else? I know we covered a lot. I think you kind of ticked all the boxes on our write-up that we had as far as questions and schedule. I think it's a good time for, we've started some questions.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to answer some stuff that maybe we didn't cover. But Matt, I really appreciate you going through all of that because that's, I think we talked about a lot of things that a lot of people have some confusion about, and you shed some light and hopefully making people's Dirac and room calibration journeys a little bit more seen instead of in the gray.
Yeah, because like I said, this is something that you don't really, I wouldn't have known. I would have went exactly by the box, that they've got, that I wouldn't deviate from that. With Odyssey, they try to tell you, okay, don't move more than like 2 feet. But of course, if you've got a couch that's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seats, and you're spanning that whole 6 seats, that's, to me, I would want the software to be able to do that, because really, if I'm only staying in this one little area, it's only measuring that one little area, and it can only kind of correct for that one little area,
right?
Which is my seat, which is good for me, but it sucks for my wife or my son or my daughter that's, sitting down next to me.
And that's why you want to give it, as much of a variation as you can, right? Like, you can have, and I'm sure, anyone who's spent a lot of time playing with audio systems can attest to this. I mean, you can have an incredible distance or change in what you're actually hearing 6 inches away from your head position. You ever been here and then you leaned out and you're like, oh, wow, it's really harsh and beamy right here, right. Or, whatever have you.
Yeah, especially with bass as well. We definitely got some great questions here. I'm just going to put them up on here and let you guys address them. So MJ says, what is the best sounding subwoofer for music that you've ever heard, and what set it apart from the competition? So I know Matt and Ryan, y'all have had a chance to hear probably a ton of subwoofers. I've had my fair share because of going from different home theater tours. And I think a lot of this is going to be subjective, of course, but we'll do our best to kind of share what we like. Matt, what's your favorite?
Yeah, we'll start with Matt.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit biased here. I love RTL subwoofers. If you're not familiar with what that means, RTL is a regenerative transmission line subwoofer.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what that means is the woofer itself is built into the box, and there's two separate pathways,
Gotcha.
one from the front of the woofer and one to the rear. So, in a degree, it works like a ported box, but fundamentally, it's very different because they have an actual geometrical pattern that's built inside. And the goal is so that when they actually hit the port of the box that feeds into the room, those two pathways are phase aligned.
Right.
The other side of this that's really cool is it has force cancellation. So you can have a box putting out, 115 dB at 20 hertz and sit a glass of wine on top of it and not have to worry about it. It's not going anywhere because the forces from those two pathways inside the box are canceling themselves out.
Gotcha.
The really, really benefit to this and why I love this, especially for music, is because it makes the transient response immediate. If you have some big, impact that happens, you don't have a ring from that. The moment that subwoofer stops moving, it's done.
Now, is that something like Danley does with their subwoofers?
Sorry, I didn't give a shout out. It would be the Wisdom Audio STS.
Gotcha.
It's a subwoofer that's about the size of a truck bed. That's a little bit bigger than your JTRs, Ryan, with 215s inside.
Nice. Now, does Danley do something similar to that?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that one.
Because I know they've got kind of like this pathway in some of them, or I've heard of like tapped horns. There's another term that I've seen where guys will build their own tapped horns. So you've got this long pathway through it, but I don't know if it has two different directions, like the front end and the back end.
Right. So this in an RTL, they would not be symmetrical because you need to manipulate the phase, and that's done through the actual length of it.
That's wild. Ryan?
I think as long as the subwoofer is quality, you're going to have a good experience. I mean, I agree with what Matt says, but I take that to a step further. I don't think there's a particular sub that I would say is the best. I think as long as it's designed properly and it's a good sub, I don't think there's a difference in a good sub for home theater or music. I think it's just going to do well if it does something well for everything.
And I'll correct myself and say that that's my favorite, not by any means the best, because it's, to a degree it's subjective, but
yeah. I mean, as far as the best, I don't know. I don't like saying best.
Yeah.
I think it's just whatever is designed well. Yeah. As long as it's designed well, I'm happy.
Yeah. So if it's a good woofer, exact same thing. It's a good woofer.
What would be designed well in your opinion?
What is designed well? I don't know. The JTR 4000s are pretty well designed, I would say.
They are. I like those a lot.
So I'll go with the 4000s. That's what I'll go with.
Definitely best subs I've ever owned with my RS2s.
Yeah.
JTR.
I mean, same experience.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because like once you hear something and experience something better than what you have, you're like, oh man. It's hard to,
I love that.
It's hard to go back. You're like, crap.
Well, that's how the human brain works, because you had a reference, right? Yeah. And then you broke that, and
you didn't know it could do.
Your reference is now different.
Like your brain says, now I have to have this.
Yeah, it's funny when we talk to people and they're like, oh, there's really not much content down below 20 hertz. So all you need is 20 hertz, and I'm like, bro, I'm telling you right now,
man,
you're missing out on some fun stuff, man. There's a bunch of stuff down there, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, you can't hear it, but you sure as heck can feel it in your room and in your body and in your organs moving around inside your body. So,
hey, it's becoming a bigger thing. I mean, you see some speaker manufacturers out there that are starting to jump on that trend and build subwoofers that are, directed to that and are, focused on the sub 20 hertz range.
Sure. Like even Stereo Integrity. I had a chance to do a really cool home theater tour with that. Actually, 2 of them. And both of those were phenomenal systems, man. They hit super, super clean, very, very deep, a lot of power, a lot of output, and really low distortion. So, but yeah, I love anything that can can properly handle those low frequencies, that just puts a big old smile on my face for sure. Good question there. Molson says, hi, I recently hear a bit of hissing sound from my center channel speaker, especially in quiet scenes and during dialogue. What's your opinion on this? Like, where would he get maybe hissing? Could that be from maybe his amplifier that's generating?
It could be. I mean, I would say so. I like to be, whenever we have a question like this, I like to look at it from a logistical standpoint, right? So first and foremost, you say especially in quiet scenes and during dialogue. Well, my first thought, initially to that you would need to remove is this the content? Does this happen on, no matter what you're playing, where that content's coming from, whether it's a Blu-ray player, streamer, Kaleidoscape, PD, Shield, whatever have you, is that consistent? Number one. Number two, what happens if you're not playing anything? Disconnect your sources, turn them off. Are you still having that there?
Sure.
Could be some problems developing in an amplifier, especially if it's an older amplifier. Could be a problem that's starting to happen in the speaker. Has it been driven too hard, perhaps? And part of, what you're hearing is, material breakdown in the actual drivers themselves. I would say, remove one thing at a time so that you can try and isolate, where it is. And then once you do isolate where it is, play with it a little bit. Like if you, isolate it down and you say, hey, I'm pretty sure it's the channel on this amplifier, swap them, put it on your left channel, see if you're having that same effect. If you're not, it could be, the actual wiring that's being run through there. It really depends. This is one of those, start picking the first needle from that haystack up and throw it behind you into a new haystack.
Yeah. And one thing too, Mosen, I would recommend too is take, and so you're saying this is maybe your center channel. Well, most of the time in a movie, your center channel is going to handle most of the dialogue. So it kind of makes sense that you're hearing it there, but maybe try switching the speaker terminal to another speaker, like move it, unhook it from the center, connect it to your right speaker and see, okay, do I hear, again, you're just trying to eliminate, is it a speaker? Is it the amplifier? Is it my cabling? Is it, there could be a lot of reasons. Is it a source? So, and with any troubleshooting, like Matt said, it's try to do just one thing at a time. And then you can determine, okay, I did this and the sound moved with it, so that means it's not this, or it didn't move with it, so that means it is this. So it can kind of help you figure out, maybe
be careful about that though too, because if they're two different speakers and their sensitivity is different, you may not hear it.
Yeah, well, yeah, but all right. So with all things, I mean, if you've got them from the same,
sure,
yeah, I mean, if it's a Frankenstein kind of system where you've got, let's say, an Infinity center channel, and then you got some Polk Audio fronts, and then you got, JBL rears or whatever, that's going to be harder, to do that.
My suggestion, and this is what I see most commonly in this, is first thing to do, when you hear it, turn your volume down, see if it goes down. Has it always been there? Would be my next question. Is this something that's new? If it is new, have you increased your volume of where you listen? Right? Because it could be the noise floor of your amplifier. Have you recently changed cables? Because you could be instituting a ground loop or some interference that's coming in through a cable. And then do what Michael and Matt suggested of start going through the signal chain and pulling things out, test different source material, different sources. It's really important to add multiple variables instead of just looking at things one-dimensionally, because if you look at it one-dimensionally, it's going to be very difficult to figure out what's going on. But only change one thing at a time. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling your hair out.
And one of the things too, you're probably hearing it during those quiet scenes, because, I mean, let's just be real. When stuff's exploding, it's hard to hear anything like precisely. Like you're not going to hear hiss at 100 dB or 90 dB. When stuff's banging and whizzing and flying by and cars are roaring by, it's going to be hard to hear that. So definitely I could see why you're getting that. So cool, man. Good luck to you. I hope you figure it out. Sometimes it's a royal pain in the butt, though.
Yep.
Siphonics Audio says, how about what makes Storm Audio a unique purchase option over or above the other processors and theater solutions other than software?
Okay. Pretty easy, straightforward. First and foremost, the way that our system is actually designed and our architecture runs is that we are a chip-based processor, not a computer-based processor. However, we have a computer running that chip base. So that gives you the flexibility and ease of controlling it and setting it up and, utilizing it, doing fine tuning, whatever have you, while still having the audio quality of a really nice chip based solution. On top of that, I would say the second thing that goes along with that is support and customer service. We have a really, really great team and process and how we handle people and work with things and making sure that our customers are always satisfied and always taken care of, to the furthest extension of our capabilities. And then the third, I would say, would probably be price, because we come in a little bit more reasonably than other people in our market space, while having a really, really high end performance point, and that extends to both the ISP Elite and the Core 16, which is our we say it's our entry level processor. It's really unfair to say that because it has the same decoder, same DSP chips, same HDMI card, everything that's in the Elite. It's just fixed at 16 channels.
Super cool. Appreciate that, man. Rocksteady says, when doing a manual subwoofer calibration using RAW, will, I'm assuming Dirac, change the calibration when you run a system calibration?
So yes, Dirac is going to make manipulations. However, what Dirac is going to do is it's going to lay what it does over the work that you've done. So, and this is not just for subwoofers, but for speakers too. If I can bring up that, as a case point, that room that we did that had the bad screen with the 14 dB roll off, Dirac would have never been able to correct that. When we did our verification measurements, when we were all done with the room, we actually found that we were within 0.5 to 0.7 dB of what our target was, actually through the screen. And that was a combination of manual EQ and Dirac. And, that was done very carefully to make sure that they don't, cause problems with each other. And, we don't want to use anything that has a really sharp cue and cause really weird interrelations. But yeah, it's going to lay it over. So, when you go into the Dirac for a system calibration, what Dirac, and it's going to pop up a dialog menu, and I can actually show you this exactly what it says if you'd like. You want to share my screen real quick, Keith, man?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Thanks, Michael. So right here, this is kind of your opening and what it's going to tell you when you go into Dirac. And basically what this is saying is that anything that you've done in the manual parametric EQ, it's going to keep, and it's going to feed that to Dirac. Any level adjustments you keep, or it's going to keep and feed that to Dirac. Anything that you do with a polarity adjustment, because those are all, as we consider them, speaker manipulation, right? So, there's a lot of people out there that have, high-end stuff that they've either created themselves or whatever have you. I mean, I can speak to this. All of the speakers in my theater are bi-amplified. They all have their own parametric EQ sets from when I, worked on them and designed them, to their own crossover points and everything else that is actually going on and existing in here. And that is what makes that speaker itself before any, manual EQ stuff that's done. So all of that has to be taken into account. What Dirac is going to disable and not look at is the bass management settings that you've done and the delays that you've done, because Dirac wants the ability to analyze your speakers and subwoofers globally in your room. It's going to do a full sweep on your subwoofers and see, what their capabilities are. Your subwoofer might, even though it doesn't sound good, it might be capable of playing, information up to 400 hertz. And Dirac wants to take that into, its knowledge and say, hey, I need to make sure that, this isn't ringing up here, for example. But yeah, it will overlay on top of what you've already done. But if what you've done already is fixing things, then you're basically removing that problem from Dirac's workload. You're giving it less to do. So, and that can be, as simple as having 2 subwoofers and making sure they're phase aligned. Dirac, will it do phase manipulation on the backside? Absolutely, 100%. But if you give it something nicer to look at, then it doesn't have to do that already.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Makes sense. Get back. Wow. Wrong one. There we go. Appreciate that, Chad, man. So Dan says, does Dirac and Odyssey... Oh, you know what? Did I unstar that one?
Yep.
Go back and, if you don't mind, go back to Chad Man's because I think I removed his.
I'm going to have to go find it.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Chad Man. I just realized I had already unstarred it. So I was thinking yours was the last question.
I got it.
So we'll go on to Dan. Oh, there you got it. Perfect. So Chad Man says, will Dirac Spatial still have a noticeable differences in 5 or 7 channel system? As I understand it, the more speakers that you have, the better it will work.
I think we're going to have to skip this one.
Okay.
I can't comment on this.
Okay.
Yeah, let's skip this one.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about anything that's coming, just
Gotcha.
because
That
there's
makes sense.
a lot of gray area and we don't want to get anybody in trouble.
True. Sorry about that, brother. Good question, though. Dan Black says, does Dirac and Odyssey run off the same principles? If not, what's the difference?
They used to be very similar. In the latest changes that they've made, there's some more variation. And to be honest, I can't speak very in depth to Odyssey because I have not done the implementation on the backside of it.
Yeah.
I can only speak to my experience with it. I find that impulse wise, it seems to do a fairly lesser job on correction. Yeah, they've kind of gone different routes. They used to be similar as far as the level till they went as far as the deploying things. Dirac seems to have chosen, even though their user interface is more simplified, to start looking at more complex methodologies for this. But that's in my opinion.
Okay.
Gotcha. And I think
Hopefully that's a fair answer.
Yeah, I think most people would pretty much agree that Dirac definitely gives you a lot more control, even though Odyssey's trying to make some
Yeah, their
strides
new app is cool.
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of new control that they're getting. It's Dirac is just kind of blazing the path right now as far as what is possible, and then setting, in my opinion, the de facto standard for room correction, not including, I'm going to say de facto standard for standardized room correction. I don't really include Trinov in that because they're a little bit different.
That's their own animal.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's the same, but not Trinov, but all of them are just kind of the same, but different, doing things differently and doing it to different levels.
Sure. Good question, man. Rasiki says, is Storm Audio using x86 Intel processors to run the surround processor?
No. I'm going to assume that by surround processor, you mean our decoding chip. And that is a Texas Instruments K2G 1 gigahertz chip.
Okay. Michael Jones, at what point or how do I get access to the dealer training as an owner? I have professional calibration done and continuing. Since you can save any calibration, I'd like to learn to do it myself. Is that possible?
100%. We have clients out there that, bought a product from a dealer and that's as far as they went. And they're have taken it home, unboxed it themselves, hooked it up, and done everything themselves as far as an integration standpoint. Now that being said, I will, throw in a, caveat here and make things, very clear from this standpoint. Anyone is welcome to do that. as far as the Storm Audio standpoint, we do not support the customer when it comes to the actual physicalities of the box. So if anything has to ever happen to it, for example, you're going to do an HDMI card upgrade, you're going to do, put more channels in it, the customer is not supported. That has to be done by a dealer in order for your warranty to remain intact. But we have a good deal of actual information on this. Our owner's manual is completely free to download on our website. You don't have to have a login or be a dealer or anything like that. We also have a pretty good repository of YouTube tutorial videos showing you everything from, how to figure out the IP address of the unit all the way to how to do a Dirac Live calibration. From our standpoint, our Dirac Live targets are available for download. We do a lot of webinars and talk about this. So, you're more than welcome to do that. The only thing that I would comment on this is, talk to your dealer about it and get their feedback, because, they can open things up for you within the interface. There's actually 2 different levels of access. So, the expert level by default doesn't have much, but they can open that up to you and allow you to make changes and things. The only thing that I have to say is, use a degree of caution when you're doing this, because if you don't know the limitations of your system or your speakers or your amplifiers, you can damage and break equipment. And at that point, that's on you. So
I think part of what Michael's asking is there additional training? Because I'm assuming you take your dealers through on how to properly set this up and calibrate. Is there anything that they could maybe even purchase from a consumer's standpoint of getting access to that kind of training? I think is what he's saying. Apart from just your YouTube or
purchase wise, no. However, we're always open to it. Like I said, one of our main focuses is customer support. So normally, when I'm doing training for things, I kind of have 2 different levels two different sessions and multiple levels of approach on that. So the first session that we do is a kind of web user interface configuration walkthrough. That can be anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes long, depending on how in depth we want to go on certain things. And we've done that, for people before in the past. So, we're not going to, leave you out in the dark.
Okay.
However, if you don't have a ton of experience, I would recommend, involving your dealer, at least to a degree, because they're probably the person who's sold you the rest of the gear and are familiar with what it can and cannot do and may know that more intimately than you. And the other thing to say about that is, and this just comes from a background of working as a speaker manufacturer and audio engineering stuff and being an audiophile and doing a lot of my own testing and verification, which is don't always trust the ratings on things. You could have a speaker that says, it's capable of playing to, 30 hertz, and you get into your room and you find that you're struggling to get anything at reference level below 43. That might not be the speaker. That might not be an incorrect, rating on the manufacturer's behalf. That could actually be the way that your room is affecting your speaker.
Yeah.
Totally, okay to do those things. I just have to also, give you the little bit of caution to practice as well.
Yeah.
But if somebody wanted to, that was the deal, and, you purchased a Storm audio processor and want to, go in and do some tweaking like that, and the, dealer is okay with it, then we have no problem, going through with some of that with you. The other side of that is your dealer can probably also give you that training as well.
Right. And I think that's where, that way, if they've got additional or you got additional questions, you can reach out to the dealer, and then it's more of a communication, and it's more of empowering you. And then, you're just developing that relationship that you already have with that. And it kind of goes along with what he's saying here too. So if they want access to some of the screens that you shared earlier, is that something they would check with their dealer to see if they would unlock it, or is that something they have to contact Storm directly?
You wouldn't have to contact us. That would be through your dealer. It's pretty easy to find out, what the access password defaults are.
Gotcha.
If the dealer, wanted to lock you out of that intentionally, they might have changed it.
Mhm.
However, I also have to go out on a limb here and say that I would expect that the majority of people, following along with something like this are more the enthusiasts who are really interested in learning themselves
Right.
and, aren't likely to be detrimental and breaking things. They just, you want to be more knowledgeable and be more capable of doing things, on your own. And that's, I 100% support that. That's awesome. That's great.
I think the biggest thing is going to be make backups.
Mhm.
And then don't be afraid to get your hands dirty,
Yeah.
right? To an extent, right? Don't go in and say, how hard can I push these things? Maybe turn your amps down so that you're not worried about blowing anything out. But try and get in. This is what we encourage people on the Mad VR side. The best way to learn is
Mhm.
through failure. Try and go figure out what something does. And then if you can't figure out what you've done to reset things back, restore the backup, start over. And then start continually building on that foundation, figuring out what everything does, take measurements in RU, watch YouTube videos, learn about what all of the frequency response and things you're doing, and go from there. I mean, I think I'm a great case study for this because I started, and Matt can probably attest to this, with Storm, meaning I was an end user, and this was like 2 years ago when I started this whole journey. And it's just been a constant learning and never stopping and continuing on that path and not being afraid to get my hands dirty and make something not work and then restore it, because that's how you're going to learn. If you're afraid that something's not going to work after you touch it, you're not going to go anywhere. You've got to be okay with things not working okay and then restoring from a backup. That's the safe spot. That's my biggest suggestion, is just get your hands dirty and see what happens and then go from there.
Rasiki says, Matt, what is the general purpose processors been used, like Intel X86?
Man, you guys are all about these processors.
Yeah,
Maybe
man.
he's trying to build one.
Well, good luck, cop. No, I'm just kidding. So I mentioned already the chip that we use for our decoder, which is the TI K2G chip. Then we have actually 4 Shark 4 DSP chips inside to handle up to 32 channels. The Core 16 has 2 of those chips. Those guys handle all of our post-processing, whether that's Dirac, manual stuff, it all lives on there. Then when we go to the DAC side, we use an Analog Devices ADAU 1966 chip. And I think that pretty much answers that.
Nice, man. So
I think the transparency is great.
yeah, I love it, man. Matt knows what he's talking about. Michael Jones, when is Dirac releasing a new bass cancellation software? Yeah, because we're not Dirac.
I could say it would be 2023. As far as I can comment on the subject.
Okay, so it might be in works.
Let's open that up and say hopefully 2023.
Yeah, hopefully 2023. Everybody who is involved is really excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be awesome.
And that is the limit of what I can say.
Cool, man. I like these little sneak peeks. Geotech, what about the fact that Storm Audio has over 3,000 filter taps for Direct Live?
It's a great fact.
So, but this is something that I was alluding to earlier, in that not all implementations and hardware devices from other manufacturers are going to have the same capability. Gotcha. And it does make a difference.
It does. Well, I mean, picture, so this is one of my favorite things, and especially because we're moving more into the future, right? And the future is digital. Back at CEDIA, we had a lot of these conversations with people. One of the new things that we did was launch our AES67 card, which I actually have one sitting right here because it hasn't been installed in the unit we are looking at yet. So every time, and this all comes back to mathematics, right? So if you guys can extend your mind back to Calc 2, right? When you learned about Riemann sums, that is one of the actual basic mathematic principles of analog to digital conversion and digital to analog conversion. I actually loved that. Electrical engineering made me go a lot farther in my math career than I thought I would have. I actually did a minor in mathematical modeling because once I got into high level EE classes, I said, oh, that's fantastic. A large portion of the high level mathematics purely exists to describe how electricity behaves and reacts.
Mhm.
So this is what we call an AES 67 card. There's two RJ45 inputs. If you notice, it says 32 channels IO AOIP. What this means is that there's actually 32 discrete channels of input and output on this card. So you can actually run everything digitally. The great part about this is you remove these conversion stages, which, you know, no matter how good your electronics and everything are adding a degree of, you know, error to things, because that's scientifically how it works. And, you know, to comment on Ryan's point, the more, you know, if you think about Riemann sums, right, the more filter tabs you have, the more of your little boxes that you have under the curve, which is allowing you to have more, you know, accurate representation when you go through those conversions.
So kind of more granular control over what's happening in
Right.
the DSP.
Ryan,
Is
did
that
you
right?
freeze on us?
Looks like it. He's gone.
Rye?
I didn't
Ooh.
really boot him. I just removed him.
Oh, okay.
That's not going to fix it. Yeah, it looks like his. Oh, he may have text. What did he say? He said just finish without him. So yeah, cool,
Don't
man.
unplug the router.
Yeah, man. We've only got one more question, so that'll work out good. We're right at about an hour and a half. So first of all, man, Matt, appreciate your knowledge, man. This has been super, super fun. Very cool. And hopefully to you guys, super informative. Last question of the night. Chadman PA says, will Dirac spatial will Dirac spatial still have noticeable differences in a 5 or 7 channel system? As I understand it, the more speakers you have, the better it will work. Can you kind of speak to that maybe? Or is that we got to wait and see?
I cannot.
Okay. Totally fair.
Sorry, guys.
Last thing we want to do is get him in trouble. So just know stuff is in the works. That's all you got to know, man.
It's exciting. It's good stuff.
And as soon as they're available, I tell you what, here's an invitation. As soon as you have some information that you think that would be beneficial to the home theater community, you're more than welcome to join us again and be able to share that with you. How's that sound?
Yeah, that would be great. Would love it.
All right. So we'll have him back on here to maybe answer some of those questions in regards to spatial as soon as we have some information. Well, super, super cool, man. I hope you guys have enjoyed this chat with Matt. Matt, appreciate your time, man. Love what you guys are doing in Storm Audio. And appreciate you just sharing the knowledge about Dirac, because a lot of guys, even like myself, I've got very limited experience with Dirac. I mean, I know it's powerful. I know that there's a lot of, capability in the software side of it, but you're partnering that with a processor side of it, with the hardware side of it, that is incredibly powerful and robust as well. And so definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate the time. Love the ability to geek out about this, because that's what I love. That's why we do this, and it's all about chasing that dial of perfection, right, and just pushing the needle a little bit farther every time. So knowledge is power.
Absolutely, man. Well, definitely check out Storm Audio's website. Is it just stormaudio.com?
Yep, just stormaudio.com. No funky spellings. It actually is one word.
Yeah. So if we got if you're trying to get into that 16 channel, so you have a 16 channel, a 32 channel, or up to 32 channel?
So we have two different processors. We have the Core 16, which is, as I mentioned, our entry level. And then we have the MK3 Elite. That's the current generation of our Elite processor. And what's really special about the Elite and kind of what sets it apart is that it's a fully modular piece. So every Elite starts off as a 16-channel analog unit, and it scales up from there. You can add an additional 8 XLR channels for a 24 analog. You can add an additional 16 for a 32-channel analog.
Yeah.
That being said, our decoder is 24 channels. It decodes 13.110, and that 10 is a breakout of the height and top layers.
Gotcha.
Just to specify and clarify that.
Sure.
And then we have digital models as well, or digital option cards for that as well. We have an AES EBU input card, which is a 16-channel in. This is for use with, DCI systems. This is for use if you have, like a Barco with an ICMPX Alchemy card, anything like that. We have an AES EBU output system. So if you want to run direct, for example, to one of the other guys manufacturers that have something out there for that. And then we have the AES 67, which is what we call our AOIP card, which is 32 channels in and out on one card. The nice thing about the Elite and why, it's such a fantastic piece of equipment is because, we kind of, ditch the ideality of, hey, in 2 years, you need to throw this away and get a new one. All of our software, the user interface that I showed is the exact same between the Core 16 and the Elite. There's no difference between that. So we went away from, hey, this is going to be a boat anchor in a couple of years. It's always upgradable. Even the MK1s that we started selling back in 2016, 2017, those could be updated to have the same HDMI card, same main board, same decoder card that the MK3 has. So it's fantastic. It's a really cool methodology or approach. And, especially nowadays where we're in, component shortage crises, we don't want to contribute to that. So,
So if somebody has a Storm, maybe an older model, and you've got upgrades that they have upgrades they want to make to it, they send the unit to you, you swap out the parts. Roughly, what kind of time frame are they looking at? Is this a couple of weeks? Is it a month?
Normally it's if you're gonna. So first off, unless you're doing a mainboard swap, it's actually on the dealer.
Okay.
So those are cards that are sent out in an advanced replacement style, and they do the swap, and you're good to go.
Oh, that's cool.
So that can be
no
done
downtime.
in a
You don't have to
singular,
unhook everything.
right? It can be a singular visit to your home.
Cool.
If it does, if it's an MK1 coming in for an MK1.5 upgrade, you've got travel time. Look at 3 to 5 days at our distribution center and repair center. It's based in Los Angeles, depending on what their current timeline and itinerary is. And then travel time back.
Cool. So just a couple weeks. Awesome.
Yep. So that, and then the other thing that we have that's going on that's new is we actually have 2 new products. We've got the Evo, as we call it, which comes in both a 19 or a 32 channel configuration, and that is a digital only processor. So that will have no analog outputs whatsoever. It's either AES EBU or AES 67. It's a smaller form factor. It's the same size as the Core 16. And then we have something else
on your website.
Huh?
Is that not on your website?
It might not be yet.
Yeah, I just see the Elite MK3, the Core 16, and the ISP Elite MK2.
Yep. So these are the new things that we launched at CEDIA. These you're going to be looking at end of the year, beginning of 2023. The other thing, which is for me even more exciting, is a piece we call the Fusion. And the Fusion actually is a 20-channel integrated piece. So it has 16 channels of Class D amplification from ICE Power built into it. 3 of those are bridgeable, or 6 of those are bridgeable. So you can have 3 high power LCR channels. And then you have an additional 4 balanced XLR outputs. So if you've got, powered subs or subwoofers with an additional amp or other speakers, it doesn't matter.
Rough MSRP on that?
We're hoping it will be under 20.
Okay. Gotcha. Super cool, man. So got some new stuff coming from Storm.
Oh, yeah.
So look out on the website. So for them to keep up to date with, what's the best way to to be notified when things like that happens? Is that your email list? Is that just looking on the website, Facebook?
That's the
Instagram?
best way to be notified is our newsletter. So if you actually go to our website and sign down at the bottom, there's a little thing that says subscribe to our newsletter, and it's got a little checkbox that says I agree to receive Storm Audio's news and accept the data privacy statement. And that's it.
So if you guys are interested in Storm Audio, head over to the website, sign up for their newsletter, and get all the latest, greatest. Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure, man. Definitely
You
appreciate
too.
your time. We'll have you back on again when we got some new updates from
Yes.
Storm on the spatial audio side of it. Hope you guys have an incredible week, and we will catch you in the next live stream, which is next Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great week, guys.